All right, we are continuing our study of the kings of Judah. Today we're going to look at two kings and the only queen of Judah and how they were influenced to do evil by the people in their lives. Our text is 2 Chronicles chapters 21 and 22, and then we'll look at Jesus, our king, and his example of submitting to God no matter what people say. So just to catch up where we are in history, the nation of Israel in the Old Testament was made up of 12 tribes that lived in separate areas of Canaan. Sometimes they got along, sometimes they didn't. And we're kind of, at this point, they don't get along. The nation of Israel in the Old Testament was, actually, let me find myself here. After bringing Israel out of Egypt, God chose judges to lead them. And that worked great for over 400 years until they decided, we don't want that anymore. We want a king. We're not like everybody else. Everybody pokes fun at us and says, why don't you have a king? We have a king, and isn't it great? Not so great. They were warned that it wasn't so great. And here's the examples we have here. It's not so great for them. And then let's see, but they remained united as a kingdom under Saul, David, and Solomon. But because of Solomon's sin, he married a whole bunch of wives. What was it? 300 wives and 600 concubines. And guess what? They turned his heart away from God. And so he worshiped idols. And God said in 1 Kings 11 that he would tear the kingdom from Solomon, but not all of it, for the sake of David. God had made promises to David. God always keeps his promises. And that is one comfort in reading this. When we come across these evil kings and all this evil that they did, there's a comfort there, because even though they made these bad decisions, God is going to keep his promise. He could have just decided, okay, I'm done, I'm starting over, but he did not, because he made a promise. And then and one part of that promise was that Jesus was going to be born from the house of David, from the line of Judah, and that family line remains unbroken all the way to Jesus, from David to Jesus. And we're going to see, despite the best efforts of someone today to wipe out the line of David, after Solomon's son became king, there was a revolt. He was dumb. I'm just going to leave it at that, because we've already studied him. As a result, the kingdom of Israel was divided into the northern kingdom of 10 tribes, which kept the name Israel. And again, the names are going to start getting confusing, because I'm reading through this, and sometimes the kings of Judah and the kings of Israel have the same name. It's kind of, guys, there are lots of names out there. In one case, and actually the case today, two guys, a brother-in-law has the same name as his brother, and they're both kings. It's kind of, come up with something. Anyway, don't leave it alone. I'm just trying to follow it. If you think that's bad, try to follow the kings of Babylon. When like Nebuchadnezzar, and it gets a whole lot worse. Anyway, so we have the northern kingdom of Judah, 10 tribes, and the southern kingdom. Let me say this right. We have the northern kingdom of Israel, 10 tribes, and the southern kingdom of Judah with 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin. Last week, we looked at the lives of King Asa and King Jehoshaphat, the 3rd and 4th kings of the southern kingdom of Judah. Both of these men were devoted to God. Now, they did make mistakes. Sounds like me. I do my best to be devoted to God, wholly devoted to God, and I make mistakes. And God forgives. And that's the wonderful part of that. But we have those examples. One of those mistakes, though, is going to have consequences for quite a number of years. Jehoshaphat made an alliance with Ahab, king of Israel, who was an incredibly wicked man. And that alliance in 2 Chronicles chapter 18 was that Jehoshaphat's son married Ahab's daughter. Now, man's wisdom at the time would have said, this is a great idea, because they've been fighting each other. Israel and Judah had been fighting each other. Well, if the king marries the daughter of another kingdom, then there's peace, right? It's a good idea. No, this is Ahab's daughter, Ahab and Jezebel's daughter. We'll get into why that's really, really bad in just a bit. It's not good. All right, so we have Jehoshaphat's son, Jehoram, married to the daughter of this incredibly evil couple. And this is going to be a problem for all of Judah for quite some years. 2 Chronicles 21, we'll start getting into our text here. And in verse 1 to 3, we see that Jehoshaphat had 7 sons. And before he died, he gave the 6 younger sons lots of gifts and sent them away to live in other cities. Now, this is a wise policy to keep civil war from happening, because you have 7 sons, they all want a piece of the pie. And he says, no, I'm going to give you gifts, I'm going to give you lots of money, I'm going to send you someplace else to live besides Jerusalem. And the oldest son, Jehoram, was, or your version might say Joram, was firstborn, and he became king. All right, so things are settled, things are good. God had been giving them peace because they had been obedient to God, they had been faithful to God. Let's go ahead and read 2 Chronicles chapter 21, verse 4 to 7, please.
When Jehoram had descended the throne of his father and was established, he slew all of his brothers with the sword, and also some of the princes of Israel. Jehoram was 32 years old when he became king. He reigned for 8 years in Jerusalem, and he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, as the house of Arab had done. For the daughter of Arab was his wife, and he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Yet the Lord would not destroy the house of David because of the covenant which he had made with David, and since he had promised to give a land to him and to his sons forever.
Okay, first thing Jehoram does, he says, well, I want to be sure I'm king, because there's maybe his younger brothers were more popular, I don't know. But he decided that the way to be king and to keep being king was to murder his brothers. Nice guy. Verse 6 says he was heavily influenced by Ahab and his family. They're a separate kingdom. Ahab is a horrible person. He's Ahab's son-in-law. Okay. 1 Kings 21:25 says, there was certainly no one like Ahab who gave himself over to do evil in the sight of the Lord, because Jezebel, his wife, incited him. Ahab was a horrible guy. Jezebel was worse, and he's Jezebel's son-in-law. 1 Kings 16 tells us that Jezebel, she's not even a Jew. She's the daughter of a foreign king who worshiped Baal, and she brought that Baal worship over with her. 1 Kings 18, first thing she does is try to kill all the prophets of the Lord. 1 Kings 19, she tries to kill Elijah. She is not successful, but she tries really hard to kill Elijah. And this is a famous one, 1 Kings chapter 21. She had a good man named Naboth murdered because Ahab wanted the man's garden. I mean, really? I mean, that's just, I mean, Ahab wanted the garden. He goes and Naboth won't sell it to him, and he goes and pouts. And Jezebel is kind of like, you're the king, you get whatever you want. And here's how, she's horrible. Yeah. Okay. So, and Jehoram's wife was the daughter of these 2 people. Okay. And she's horrible. And apparently she had a lot of influence over her son. But verse 7 is a comfort, because it's a reminder God always keeps his promises. He was so evil that, when it says he's not willing to destroy the house of David, Jehoram was bad enough to deserve God to just say, fine, I'm going to wipe you out. And he'd already, he'd killed his brother, so there wasn't anybody left of the line of David except him. But God did not destroy him because of his promise. As we get further into 2 Chronicles chapter 21, we see in verse 12 that Elijah the prophet, now Elijah was a prophet in Israel, in the north. So he wasn't living in Judah, but he sent Jehoram a letter. And I'm just going to summarize the letter here. But he told him, because you've chosen to be like Ahab by murdering anyone who got in your way, and you've led Judah to be unfaithful to God, God is going to punish you by taking away your family and giving you a horrible sickness that will eventually kill you. Verse 19 tells us that it took 2 years for Jehoram to die. Now, you might look at that as, oh, how terrible he was. He had this really horrible sickness for 2 years, but this is 2 years that he had an opportunity to repent. I mean, because Elijah tells him, this is what you need to do. This is why you're going to be sick. And so he could have repented any time in 2 years. He had that opportunity, because this is God's mercy, that he doesn't just strike him dead instantly, which he definitely could have because of his evil. He's murdered his brothers. He's murdered anybody that he thinks is in his way. He's listening to the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel and doing more and more evil and causing the people to worship idols. But he gets 2 years to repent, and that is the mercy of God there. But he doesn't take that. Yes.
Didn't his family get sick too?
His family gets murdered.
Okay, but in here where it says that
Where they,
Jehovah Lord will strike your people with a serious affliction.
yes, which verse are you in?
Uh,
Yeah.
14.
With great calamity,
Oh, okay.
that he's going to suffer. And then let's see, verse 17, there were those who came against Judah and invaded him and carried away all the possessions, and they killed his sons.
Mine
Mine
says
says
a
a plague.
Okay. I have calamity. Well, part of that, he got the plague. Part of the plague was his sons are also killed. So everybody's going to die here. 2 Chronicles 21 verse 19 reads about Jehoram. He died in great pain, and his people did not make a funeral fire for him like the fire for his fathers. He departed with no one's regret, and they buried him in the city of David, but not in the tombs of the kings. He's caused a lot of trouble. With this disobedience to God, that God in verse 16 allows the Philistines and the Arabs to come in and attack Judah, and they've carried away all the possessions. I mean, this king has done things and God has punished, and the king still didn't repent. But the people are kind of like, he's dead, good riddance. I mean, he didn't get the normal funeral that a king got. He didn't get buried where the kings got buried. He was just, the people knew he was a bad, evil king. But this king, Jehoram, instead of following the example of his father, who was wholly devoted to God, Jehoram chose to be influenced to do evil by his wife and by her family. I mean, it was definitely a choice. He got letters. He got a letter telling him, don't do this. He had his father's example, don't do this. He got punished by God, trying to say, okay, repent because this is happening, because you're turning away. And yet he listened to the influence of his wife and of her family, and just continued to do evil until he died. And when he died, the people were kind of like, good riddance. They just, he was not a good king. Even it was just, he was just a bad person. Any comments about Jehoram? Yeah. Yeah.
So wonder they didn't throw a party for him.
Yeah. It's almost,
Celebrate.
we will actually get to where they saw. You're cribbing my notes. Congratulations, everybody has done it. It's a rite of passage to crib my notes. But yes, there will be a celebration, because eventually this evil will continue for a while because of this bad decision to listen to evil people. When your leaders listen to bad people, bad things happen. And that's going to go on for a number of years still. Any other comments before we get on to our next king here? All right. In 2 Chronicles chapter 22, Jehoram, he only had one son left. Well, if you think about it, he left his father with only one son, and now he's left with only one son because God has allowed people to invade and kill all of his sons except for one, the youngest. When Jehoram dies, he has only one son, Ahaziah, who was made king when Jehoram died. He became king in verse 2, tells us when he was 22 years old. Can any young man of 22 make good decisions? I'm sorry?
42.
Where am I?
22 verse 2.
Yes. Ahaziah was
42. Mine says
Okay.
42.
42 or 22?
Mine says 22, but
Hmm.
it's short. Mine has
Okay.
a
Wait a
short
minute.
side.
We never had this happen.
I know.
Mine says-
Interesting.
The
Because
New
in
King
Second
James
Kings-
Version says
Says-
42.
Okay. The real point is he got to reign for 1 year.
What does 2 Kings 8:26 say?
22.
22?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mine has a note at the bottom, 42 should be 22 as in 2 Kings. 8.
Okay. All right. So we're going to go with 22. Okay. All right. Because it also makes sense with what follows, that he was much younger.
Dad was 42 years old.
Yeah. All right. So he became king when he was 22. He reigned for just 1 year. He was also evil. Remember who his mother is. His mother is Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, and she just keeps being a horrible person here. And here it's interesting that in verse 2 of 2 Chronicles 22, she's identified as the granddaughter of Omri. I'm gonna back up a little bit. Now, again, we're going back to the kingdom of Israel. We're supposed to be in Judah, but going back to the kingdom of Israel, Omri was king. His son was Ahab. Okay, so this evil is generational here. So we have Omri, his son Ahab, king of Israel, horrible person. 1 Kings 16:25 says, Omri did evil in the sight of the Lord and acted more wickedly than all who were before him. Well, his son Ahab was even worse than he was. Okay. And then Ahab had a daughter, Athaliah. I think Athaliah was worse than either of those guys. And we'll get to why she was so bad in just a few minutes. But her son, Athaliah's son, Ahaziah, let me pronounce this right, or try to. Her son is king now. Her husband's dead. Her son is king. Okay, great. I'm the mother of the king. I still have influence. Well, he only gets to reign for 1 year. And as we go on, we see that there's this really tight relationship between northern Israel and Judah. And it's not good for Judah because Israel has gone so far into idolatry. And we see the people from Israel, from the ruling family of Israel, coming down and influencing Judah to also worship idols. Not a good thing. Verse 3 of 2 Chronicles 22 that says that his mother, and this is Athaliah, was his counselor to act wickedly. Okay, so this horrible person who was you have Omri, who's a terrible person, Ahab, who's worse than that, Athaliah, who's worse than that, and she's the one that the king is currently listening to. Well, it's his mom, he's going to listen to her. No, you don't have to listen to anybody, even if they're in your family, who is telling you to do bad things. Again, it just, and he gets to reign for just 1 year. He's that bad, and 1 year, Ahaziah is killed. Now, there were other counselors that Ahaziah could have listened to. There were counselors, I am sure, left over from his grandfather's time who said, remember when Jehoshaphat was king and we were at peace and everything was good and God was blessing us. No, he didn't listen. He would have been around when his father received that letter from Elijah. And Elijah is saying, you're worshiping idols. You're doing wicked things. Repent, do the right thing here. But he chose to listen to his mother and be influenced by her evil. Any comments on this guy? He's really fast. He got to reign for 1 year and then he's killed. Does it say here? He was slain. He went and he fought with yeah, he went to war with the son of Ahab. So he joined up with Israel. Again, not good. He joined up with Israel to fight. He's wounded and then he's killed. So again, any other comments about that? I mean, listening to the bad.
We have a
Yeah. Oh,
question.
sorry. Yes. Back up.
To the age.
Yes.
Kathy, Mary has English, it was English Standard Version, right? And it had a note on it, and it said that in the Septuagint, it says 20.
20.
Says 20. In Hebrews, it says 42, the Septuagint 20. I can't remember what is the Septuagint. I've heard David talk about.
Oh, that's the first
That's the
five.
first 5.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pentateuch is the first 5.
Yeah.
So the
Septuagint.
Old
I'm drawing a blank now.
I learned that. That's right, Hugh Hackers. Because I go over all that stuff with the little fellas on Sunday morning. I'm learning a lot. I want to say it's a different.
Was you got your notes looking at?
Yes.
Yeah.
A Greek version of the Hebrew Bible.
Okay.
So,
Pentateuch is the first 5 books.
Discrepancy though, that I have real.
Yeah.
Well, now you know.
Yeah.
All the other
And the
versions I looked
Hugh
up.
Hackers
Huh. That's interesting. I did not know that because my version says 22
See what Sam.
and I will ask him. But I will ask him about that. But as we get on to this third person, we'll see why I think it's more the 22, as opposed to, it is a little warm in here. Thank you. All right. So, but what we have here are two kings who don't get to reign for very long, who are listening to bad advice. They know it's bad advice because they have good advice to compare it to. That's one thing if they had never heard good advice in their entire lives, but they'd heard good advice. They'd seen the letter, and they're still listening to bad advice. Let's get to our next the one queen in 2 Chronicles chapter 22. Remember, Ahaziah is dead. This is the queen's this is Athaliah's son is dead. Okay. Now his son should become king. That's how kings work, right? That's how a dynasty worked. You know, you have the king, he dies, his son is king, he died. I mean, that's how a dynasty works. But the first thing, anybody who knows what the first thing Athaliah did when she found out that her son, the king, was dead?
She killed everybody else.
She killed all of his kids. I mean, these are her grandkids.
I'm the queen. Bye.
Yeah, 2 Chronicles 22:9. Now, the king is dead. His son should become king, but 2 Chronicles 22 verse 9 says there was no one in the house of Isaiah. Am I in the right spot? Yes, and the last part of verse 9 says, so there was no one of the house of Ahaziah to retain the power of his kingdom. They were too young, which kind of makes me think that the king was very young, because you have just these really, really young kids. There's no one that could just step up and say, okay, that's my father, I'm the next king. So these are small. So Ahaziah might have been, if he was 22 when he became king, and I'll check into that, then he might have been 23 when he died. His children were too young to just step up and say, you know, step into the kingship and say, okay, I'm king. That's how the king dynasty works. So let's go ahead and read 2 Chronicles 22, verse 10 to 12, please.
When Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she proceeded to destroy the whole royal family of the house of Judah. But Jehoshaphat, the daughter of King Jehoram, took Joash, son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the royal princes who were about to be murdered, and put him in his nurse in the bedroom, because Jehoshaphat, the daughter of King Jehoram, and the wife of the priest Jehoiada. That was not a roller. I don't know how to pronounce that one.
Jehoiada.
Yeah, was Ahaziah's sister. She hid the child from Athaliah, so she could not kill him. He remained hidden with them at the temple of God for 6 years, but Athaliah ruled the land.
Okay.
Outside. That but the one.
So close.
Yes, very.
All right.
Yes.
Here we go. So verse 10, right after hearing that her son, the king, is dead, Athaliah decides to kill all his children. Anybody who could have any claim to the throne. Her grandchildren. What a horrible,
Can't get any worse.
when you say that, and that's why when we read about Omri, the king of Israel, it's kind of like, how could anybody be worse than him? Well, Ahab was worse than him. Ahab didn't kill his own grandkids. This person, yeah, and so this person, I mean, they continue to get worse. And it's amazing how evil can continue to get worse. I'm sorry? Oh, no.
So all the royal offspring of Judah were her grandchildren.
Yeah. So she's wiped out her grandkids. So again, picture the scene here. This order in verse 11, this order to murder these children has gone out. Remember, they're not old enough to step up and be king. They're not old enough to, there's got to be chaos, screaming. I mean, I can't even imagine what's going on here. And that's when Ahaziah's sister grabs probably the only baby she can find and runs and hides him in the temple. I mean,
Whose sister?
The previous kings. Okay, so, and actually she's probably protecting them from her mom. This is probably,
This is one heir.
yes.
How come she didn't become queen?
Who? The sister?
Uh-huh.
Because Athaliah grabbed the power and she's having everybody killed, and she has enough support she's, she has enough support that people are killing in her name. And
So this is
yeah, so you
this
have,
guy's remaining heir.
yes, this is Ahaziah's only child to survive the slaughter. Okay. And he's kept hidden, and verse 12 tells us he's kept hidden in the temple for 6 years. Okay. So are we following?
Yeah,
So-
what I find interesting
Uh-huh.
though is she took this little one away among the royal princesses who were about to be murdered. She just snatched one, just grabbed and went.
That's what I'm picturing total chaos. Okay. Because Athaliah has ordered all these kids to be killed. I don't know how many there were or anything like that, but anybody who could lay claim to the line of David, to the real king, because that's who would be king, that's who would have that's who could be on the throne, and anyone who could lay claim to that, she's having them killed. Okay, Athaliah is, and so I'm picturing chaos, screaming, people running around trying to, people trying to protect children. I mean, and so she grabs probably the only baby she can find, runs to the temple.
Like your Moses.
And they all hide
sorry?
there.
Like your Moses.
Yeah, a bit.
Yes, my
Yeah.
goodness.
So again, so she's, and so there's just, I picture total chaos, and she just, there's one alive, I'm gonna grab it and run to the temple. And so, I mean, the bravery of that when people are swinging swords around and all that kind of stuff, she's an amazing person. So again, yeah, so she runs to the temple with him, and he is raised for 6 years in the temple. All right, so Athaliah is trying to wipe out the line of David.
And she
Because
thought she
again,
did too.
She thought she did, because if the line of David is wiped out, then she can set up a new dynasty in Judah. Okay, and it's going to be the dynasty of Ahab in Israel and in Judah. That's what she's trying to do here. But God made a promise, and God promised that the line of David would not be broken, that Jesus would be born from the line of David. So she's not going to win. Okay, she's set up to fail. She's already going to fail because God has promised. All right, in 2 Chronicles 23, this is an exciting chapter. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but verse 1 tells us that Jehoram, the priest who's married to Jehoshabeath, they've been raising this baby that she rescued. Okay, raised him for 6 years. And verse 1 says that he gathered his courage. All right. It says here that he strengthened himself. He gathered up his courage. It's kind of, it's time to put an end to Athaliah's reign. It's horrible. She's horrible. The temple of Baal is right next to the temple of God. I'm making that up. But again, it's got to be right there. Okay. So he gathers his courage, and he decides it's time to put an end to the reign of Athaliah and put the true king back on the throne, the king from the line of David. Verse 2, he gathers the captains of the army and the Levites, and he tells them in verse 3, behold, the king's son shall reign as the Lord has spoken concerning the sons of David. He understood what Athaliah had been trying to do to wipe out the dynasty of David. He says, no, we've got a son of David. We've got someone from that line. We've got a son of the king here. Verse 11, they crowned Joash as king. This kid's 7 years old. I don't even know if he understands really what's going on, but he's understood that he can't leave the temple for 6 years. He's not, I doubt he's been able to go outside and play or anything like that. He's had to stay in the temple or in the temple court because he's in hiding. Okay, if there was just a hint that there was someone that survived, then Athaliah would have gone after him. All right, so verse 11, they crown him king. In verse 12, Athaliah hears the noise because there's celebration. Okay, they brought him out in verse 11. They brought out the king's son. They put the crown on him and gave him the testimony and made him king. And Jehoiada and his sons anointed him and said, long live the king. There's excitement here. There is someone of David's line left. And so everybody is excited.
There's hope.
Yes, there's hope. When Athaliah heard the noise of the people, the people are running and praising the king. She's hearing all this. It's kind of like, what's going on? Because this is this is getting out. People are making this huge announcement to everybody in Jerusalem. She hears about this. She comes to investigate. Verse 12, she sees this 7-year-old on the throne, being crowned here. Verse 13, she pitches a fit. Well, yeah, she starts, she tears her clothes, she yells, treason, treason. So she's pitching a fit. Well, by verse 15, she's dead. Okay, it's kind of like, no, you don't have any more power. We have an actual king. We're being supported because Jehoram was smart. He got the army on his side. He got all the Levites on his side. And he says, you know what, we're going to make this right. And they do that. And so by verse 15, she is dead. And then verse 16, the people tear down the temple of Baal. Verse 16, Jehoiada made a covenant between himself and all the people and the king that they should be the Lord's people. Okay. It's like we've had years of worshiping Baal. It's not gone right for us. Our enemies are attacking us. They're winning. They're taking all of our stuff. They're killing our people. We need to turn back to God. When we were worshiping God, there was peace. There was prosperity. We need to get back to worshiping God. And verse 17, and all the people went to the house of Baal and tore it down, and they broke his altars into pieces and his images, and they killed his priests. They're saying, you know what? You're right. We've been listening to this evil for years. It's time to stop.
I think it's interesting where they killed her.
Yes.
Where did they kill her?
Take her out of the way.
Yeah.
Horse gate.
Yep.
So probably the worst gate.
Right. Yeah, probably.
Take her out of the house.
Well, yeah, they weren't. She
They
didn't.
didn't want him
She
in
was
there.
trying to come to the house she was trying to come to the temple.
Right.
And it's like, no, you don't get to come here. We're going to take care of this. And
How long did she run?
6 years.
Oh, okay, I didn't know if that was.
No. All right. And then verse 21 says, so all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was at rest, for they had put Athaliah to death with the sword. Now imagine this person who killed her grandkids. Do you think she let a whisper of anybody saying boo to her? Anybody live that disagreed with her at all? I mean, this was a reign of terror. It had to be because of who this person was. This was a time when, and when Israel or Judah was not following God, God allowed their enemies to succeed against them. So this was a terrible time for Judah. And so when she is dead, they rejoiced. And it says the city was at rest. God gave them peace.
When the young king is probably thought, oh, we're having a party.
Yeah, he's 7 years old. But we'll get into him next time.
That was his birthday.
Yeah. Happy birthday to you. All right. So her death ended years of misery and idolatry caused by leaders listening to evil advice. I mean, when you think it doesn't matter what you hear and all the things that go on, I don't care if it's music or whatever, it gets in our heads. And
Was she Jehoshaphat's wife?
She was Jehoshaphat's son's wife. I do. She was Jehoram.
Be so big and so.
Yeah.
It's- I have, yeah.
Because these names are so similar. and confusing.
I have something I've looked it up, and if you try to go side by side with Israel, it's kind of confusing, but we are focused on Judah.
Right.
But I do have a list of the kings of Judah because, yeah, it starts to, I'll bring it for next week because it does start to go, who are we now? Because we got 20 of these people to get through. So, but again, I can't imagine the misery of living under the total totalitarian rule of someone who was willing to kill her own grandkids. I mean, just the fear and the reign of terror that she must have. But they rejoiced when she was dead. I mean, they were happy when her husband was dead. They were happy. Her son reigned only for a year, so I mean, so he hardly. Yeah. He just.
It's like you said the wrong thing. It's like, bye.
Yeah, but the evil. It's amazing how evil grows, and just continues. I mean, it was generational here.
However,
You
the
can know that they're
daughter,
in heaven then, or will be.
Now, I don't know if the daughter, I don't know if
she was raised.
Ahaziah's, I don't know if Ahaziah's sister was also Athaliah's daughter. They could have been halves or something like
Right.
that,
Oh,
because the
that's
kings
true.
had a bunch of
True.
wives.
And
Okay.
So they could have been halves,
'Cause I
but
was
again,
thinking, wow.
uh, what was her name again?
Jesus.
Jehoshabeath, she chose a different way, because again, the letter from Elijah is well known. The priests of God are still trying to teach the people. She made a different choice.
Well, even if they had been raised by the same people.
There was
her
still a
part- her
different,
part was
yes.
Different than.
there's always a choice.
Yep. The good kings had bad sons. Right.
And yep, yes, they did. It really did go back and forth like that. Any other comments about these kings and this one queen before we move on? Because yeah, some horrible people that met a sticky end, and everybody was good riddance. All right, let's look at Jesus. Let's go ahead and turn to Matthew chapter, Matthew chapter 16. But we got to learn from these people, because it matters who we listen to.
Well, history repeats itself.
Yes, and that's what was happening. History was repeating itself because they kept doing the same behavior. They kept listening to the evil advisors that they had.
Yes, it's doing the same. We're expecting something different.
All right, Matthew chapter 16, verse 21 to 23, please.
From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and the chief priests and scribes, and be killed and be raised on the third day. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, God forbid it, Lord, this shall never happen to you. But he turned and said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are not setting your mind on God's interests, but man's.
Thank you. All right. I don't think there was any way that Peter really understood about the resurrection at this point. And it seems all that he heard was his friend and teacher of these past years talking fatalistically about going to Jerusalem to die. And if you hear a friend, in this case, you're also your teacher, talking about dying, that's upsetting. You're not going to just, just listen to that. And we know Peter's personality. Peter was a fighter. Peter always jumped in head first, feet first, hoof and mouth disease, both feet in his mouth. He was always jumping in head first. Remember, Peter was the one with the sword who chopped off the man's ear when they came to arrest Jesus. Peter was ready to fight and defend Jesus, and he was upset when Jesus is saying, I'm going to go die. It's upsetting to him, and he's worried, and he tells him, stop, knock it off. Don't talk like that. Okay. You can kind of, when you're thinking about it from Peter's perspective, you can kind of hardly blame him for responding like that, because none of them wanted Jesus to die. It's kind of like, what do you mean you're going to die? You're a young man. You're not going to die. We're not going to let this happen.
Well, I mean, beyond just the personal relationship, if he died, they thought that was just the end of.
Right.
of-
Because of their understanding
Yeah.
of what it meant for him to be king.
Right.
Right. So Jesus has his response here in verse 22. His first response is, get behind me, Satan. All right. Now, at the beginning of his ministry, what happened in Matthew chapter 4? The temptations by Satan. Satan tempted Jesus to not submit to God's plan for his life. What's happening at the end of Jesus' life? He is being tempted again to not submit to God's plan for his life. Okay. One of his closest friends is telling him, even insisting, don't do this. Okay. Jesus responds again, you're a stumbling block to me. Jesus has to be struggling at this point. He knows what he has to do. He knows what kind of death he's going to die. He knows he's going to suffer on the way to dying. Okay. And he knows he doesn't have to. That's got to be the hardest thing. If I knew I was going to die and it was going to be a hard death, that's hard enough already to do the right thing leading up to that. If I knew I didn't have to, because in Matthew 26:53, Jesus says, do you imagine that I could not appeal to my Father and he would at once send more than 12 legions of angels to defend me? He didn't have to die. but he's being tempted here. He knows what's coming. He's being tempted to not submit to God's plan for his life. And then he tells Peter why Peter's advice is wrong. He says, you are not setting your mind on God's purposes, but man's. So he doesn't just get after Peter. He doesn't just tell Peter, you're messing me up here. You're tempting me. He tells Peter why what Peter has said is wrong. Peter is sincerely worried about Jesus. I mean, isn't that the thing when someone gives you the most sincere advice and you know it's the worst thing possible, but it's so sincere. Peter, Peter hears him talking about dying and he reacts to it. Of course he does. But instead of following, again, he's running out ahead. Instead of following and submitting to what Jesus has said, Peter jumps in front. That's why Jesus has to tell him, get behind. You're jumping out in front here. And Peter has declared what he thought was right for this situation. And again, the advice from sincere people who love you and tell you God just wants you to be happy. I didn't say that one. Oops. But again, but that's what happens. People who love you, who care about you, and they give you advice, and it's kind of like, but that means I wouldn't be submitting to God if I do this thing. And what he has said, what Peter has said, is making things harder for Jesus. It's already hard enough, okay? Because but it's making it so much harder because it's the wrong advice from someone that Jesus cares about. Instead of being supported, he's being pulled away from what he has to do to submit to God. Any comments on that? Yes.
I have a comment on something previously. I looked up Jehoshaph's mother.
Yes.
This is what it says. It was likely a concubine of King Jehoram of Judah, but not a favored wife because she gave birth to a daughter.
And again, I don't know where that comes from.
It's
it's
just a thought.
right. It is a thought. It's a possible thought, but the text doesn't tell us. But again, we know that the kings always had multiple wives and multiple children. Yeah, concubines, wives, all kinds of things. But again, when we get to Jesus and Jesus knowing what he has to do to submit to God, hearing advice from a good friend, don't do this. I want you to be happy and healthy and whole and all these things. And Jesus' response of, nope, I'm going to submit to what God has to say. I'm not going to listen to this advice. And you need to rethink what you're saying because it's not from God. Okay.
But they didn't want him to die either.
Well, of course not. Any other comments on this passage? Okay. Well, as we're finishing up, what about us? Who do we listen to? Who influences us? I mean, sometimes it can be family, good friends who just the advice that they give us or how they're talking, the counsel they give us, it just would not have us submit to God. I've got family like that. I'm sure we all do. We've all had friends like that who it's kind of like, well, what do you mean you're doing this? Of course you need to do this other thing. It's kind of like, but that wouldn't be submitting to God.
God's gonna love you anyway. That's what they
Right. God wants you to be happy.
You don't
Yeah.
have to do
My
Yeah.
mother
do all that.
Or God will understand.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. All of those things that distract us or tempt us away from
The truth.
submitting to God and beyond just the truth, but actually following that truth, submitting to what God has said. And it's like, God said this, I have to do this.
My mother doesn't understand me.
Yeah.
Submitting to God in the good times is easy.
Yes.
It's a hard time.
Yes.
When you start getting that advice.
I know.
It's a temptation.
When things are hard is when you get all the free advice. Yeah, and sometimes free advice is worth what you pay for it. But again, that's when it's harder too. Exactly. When things are hard.
Inside.
And this is what happened to Jesus. He's hurting already. He's has this death staring him in the face at this point. It's not 3 years off anymore. It's around the corner. And the advice he gets, the counsel he gets hurts him because it would have him not submit to God. And so it's a personal hurt.
He should have
Here.
said, Peter, if you want to go to heaven, you better let me die.
Yeah. They just could not understand that.
Well,
Yeah, absolutely. But between But between family, friends, TV, music, the internet, we are inundated with advice all day long. I mean, just some of the songs that you listen to. I was listening to the gospel station. I was listening to the gospel station, and it was saying, you know, there's this one song, it's a great song, but it says there's only love in the heart of God. It's like, no, there's not. You can say there's, I mean, so it's kind of, that's not even safe to listen to. You can say there's always love in the heart of God, but not that there's only. Where are we at?
I was telling her to read 16:21, 21, no, Matthew 16, verse 23,
Ah, yes,
because she was saying what Jesus say to Peter.
right. Well, this is what he told him. It's kind of like, you know, you're running out ahead. Yeah, you're running out ahead, you know, back up, back yourself up. You're hurting me,
Yeah.
and you're not listening, you're not submitting to God.
You're looking at it as the way a man looks at it.
Yeah.
Physical.
Yes. Well, I want to go ahead and read 1 Corinthians 15, verse 33. This reads, don't be fooled. Bad friends will ruin good habits. My daughter told me about, they split the class up when she was in high school. You know, of course, you know, you got the guys and the girls class. And she said the two young ladies that were teaching the class, they had this sample one time. And they said, one of them stood on a chair and said, okay, how hard is it for me to pull someone up to where I am? Kind of hard. She said, how easy is it for someone to pull me down? And they actually demonstrated that. And that stuck with Sarah. And she actually told me about that. And yeah, it is easy for people we care about to pull us down, to pull us away. If we listen to them, if we're not strong, if we don't know what God has said, if we're not willing to submit to it, it is real easy, because when things are hard, I want to be happy. When things are hard, I want things to be easy. They're not always easy. It just isn't.
The teenagers are young people because they don't
Yes.
they want to go along with the crowd. They don't want to be
Right.
strong and say, I'm not doing this. They want to follow
Right.
the crowd and be.
Right.
I was
Oh,
gonna
it
say,
is hard.
I bet we all heard that scripture from our moms.
Oh, yeah. Are there any other comments?
There's never a time when you outgrow that.
Exactly. We looked at that last week, where the kings in the last few years of their lives faced temptations that pulled them, that had them stumbling. It's never, you know, it's never something that stops until,
Everybody.
yes, at every point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because who does he want? The people he's got, he doesn't have to worry about. Right.
That you surround yourself with people.
Yes.
That's what I'm doing. I'm the only one in the room. And oh dear. But you are all so very helpful.
Any other comments as we're finishing up?
Sample.
All right. I want to go ahead and finish with Proverbs chapter 13, verse 20. He who walks with wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. Thank you so much for your time and for your comments.